My name is Margaret. I'm 63 years old. And what I'm about to tell you is not a story about monsters hiding in the shadows. It's about the ones who sit at your dinner table, the ones you tuck into bed at night. It's a story that will forever change the way you see your own family. Margaret, don't move. Play dead. Just 3 days ago, my own son Julian and my daughter-in-law Clara guided my husband Arthur and me to the edge of a 90-foot cliff and pushed. As I lay shattered on the rocks below, tasting blood and the bitterness of betrayal, that whisper from my husband was the only thing that kept me alive. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was what Arthur revealed to me in the darkness of that gorge. A terrible truth he had guarded for 25 years. A secret that proved our entire life was a lie. For 4 decades, Arthur and I built what we believed was a fortress of love. Our little suburban home was our kingdom. I remember every detail with a clarity that now feels like a curse. The smell of fresh coffee mingling with the scent of sawdust from Arthur's workshop. The sound of birds in the great oak tree outside our window. It was a symphony of simple, profound happiness. I was a first-grade teacher at the local elementary school. Every afternoon, I'd come home with my pockets full of confiscated toys and my heart full of stories about scraped knees and triumphant A+. Arthur, my Arthur, had his carpentry shop in our garage. He was more than a carpenter. He was a sculptor of wood. His hands, rough with calluses yet impossibly gentle, could coax a soul from a simple block of maple. He built every piece of furniture in our home, and each one held a piece of him. We had 2 sons, Leo and Julian. Leo, our firstborn, was sunshine personified. He had Arthur's skill and my laugh. He was the soul of our house, always helping his father in the shop, his blonde hair perpetually dusted with sawdust. He was my protector, always shielding me from the small worries of the world. He was the kind of boy who, even at 17, would still bring me a fistful of dandelions from the yard. Julian was 5 years younger. He was the quiet moon to Leo's brilliant sun. More reserved, more watchful. Where Leo would burst into a room, Julian would slip in unnoticed. I loved him with the same ferocious intensity, of course. A mother's love is not a pie to be divided into slices. It is an ocean, vast and deep enough for all her children. Or so I told myself. A mother never plays favorites. It is a sin to even think it. That belief was the first brick in the wall of my own denial. On Sundays, after church, the whole family would gather around the oak dining table that Arthur had carved with his own hands. Intricate ivy patterns wound around the legs, a testament to his patience and love. Leo, full of life and plans, would talk animatedly about studying engineering, about building bridges that would connect cities. Julian would just pick at his food, his eyes downcast, a silent spectator in the theater of our family. I saw it as shyness, a gentle nature. I never once thought it could be resentment. Trust is a mirror. Once it's broken, you can never see the same reflection. Life was a beautiful, simple tapestry. In the evenings, Arthur and I would walk the trail around our small town, hand in hand. We'd talk about our dreams, watching our grandchildren grow, traveling to see the ocean for the first time, growing old together in that very house, on the porch he had built. We walked that path thousands of times, a gentle rehearsal for the one that would be used to lead us to our deaths. Weekends were a blur of joyous chaos. My sisters, Beatrice and Irene, would come with their families. The house would overflow with the thunder of small feet, the perfume of my sister's famous apple pie, and the easy laughter of people who felt safe and loved. Arthur was my perfect partner, my anchor. After 40 years, he still brought me wildflowers he'd pick on his way home from the lumber yard. He'd help me grade my students' papers, his large, blunt fingers surprisingly deft with the red pen. I would hold a piece of wood steady for him as his saw sang its clean, high song. We were a team, an unbreakable unit. A lie we told ourselves so often it became our reality. Perfection, I've learned, is often just a mask. It's the beautiful, polished lid on a box full of sorrow. And our box was about to fly open. When Leo turned 20, a strange chill crept into our warm home. It started with whispers. I'd hear him and Julian arguing in the hallway, their voices low and sharp. The moment I appeared, they'd fall silent, the air thick with unspoken conflict. Arthur would wave it away. Brotherly stuff, Ellie. It'll pass. I clung to his words like a life raft, because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. The thought that my family was anything less than perfect felt like a personal failure. The arguments grew more frequent. I once saw Leo grab Julian by the collar in the garage, his face a mask of fury. "You tell them or I will," he'd hissed, before seeing me in the doorway and letting go, his anger dissolving into a sad frustration. Julian just stared at the floor, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. I asked what it was about, but Leo just shook his head. "It's nothing, Mom. I'll handle it." But he never got the chance. It was a Tuesday in October, exactly 25 years ago. The air was crisp with the promise of winter. Leo didn't come home for dinner. That wasn't like him. He always called. We waited. 8 o'clock became 11, then midnight, then 1 in the morning. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was a hammer blow to my heart. Julian was in his room, the light on under his door. He said he was studying for a midterm, but when I'd knock, he'd take a long moment to answer. When he did, there was something in his eyes, not grief, not worry, but a kind of hollowed-out exhaustion, a strange and unsettling calm. I kept asking him if he knew where Leo was, if they'd had another fight. He just shook his head. "He probably just went for a drive to clear his head, Mom. He'll be back." The silence of a liar is louder than any shout. Arthur went out to search for him, rallying our neighbors. They fanned out across our small town, their flashlight beams cutting through the autumn fog like desperate prayers. They checked every corner, every trail, every place a 20-year-old boy might go to think. At dawn, they found his car parked near the river gorge. And then they found his body, at the bottom of the ravine, nestled among the rocks like a fallen angel. The police called it a tragic accident. They said he had probably gone for a walk in the dark, lost his footing on the slippery leaves, and stumbled. There was no reason to suspect otherwise. Our town was safe. Our family was perfect. I never questioned that version of the story. I couldn't. To question it would be to admit that the monster I feared wasn't out in the world, but inside my own home. My grief was a vast, dark ocean, and denial was the only shore I could find. Leo's funeral was a gray, surreal blur. I wore my only black dress, the same one I'd worn to my mother's funeral years before. I remember the scent of lilies, so thick and sweet it made me gag. Julian was strangely composed for a boy who had just lost his only brother. While I sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen shut, he remained silent, his expression unreadable. Now, knowing what I know, that placid mask sends shivers down my spine. It wasn't calm. It was the quiet of a predator who has successfully made a kill. Arthur never left my side. He held me up when my legs gave out, whispering words of comfort. Words that I now know must have tasted like ash in his mouth. He was already a keeper of the secret then, my co-conspirator in a lie I didn't even know we were telling. He was protecting our surviving son. But in doing so, he was sacrificing the truth, and he was sacrificing me. We buried my son, but we also buried the truth. And for 25 years, it lay dormant, a seed of poison waiting for the perfect moment to sprout. And that moment was drawing closer with every passing day. In the weeks after we buried Leo, our house fell silent. The vibrant colors of our life had bled into a muted, sorrowful gray. Grief is a house guest who never leaves. It simply learns to live in the quiet corners of your rooms, a constant, heavy presence. Arthur retreated into his workshop. The sound of his saws and sanders became his language, the only way he seemed able to process his pain. He worked from dawn until long after dusk, filling our home with beautiful, mournful things. A rocking chair no one sat in, a bookshelf filled with books no one read. He was building a wall of wood and work around his heart, and I was on the other side of it. Julian changed completely. And in my blindness, I saw it as a blessing. He became more attentive, more loving, as if he were trying to single-handedly mend the shattered pieces of our family. He helped me with chores, a task Leo had always grumbled about. He accompanied his father to the workshop, learning the craft with a quiet intensity he'd never shown before. He'd bring me small things when he saw the sadness creeping into my eyes. A pastry from the town bakery, a novel from the library. I thought it was his way of dealing with the immense grief, of trying to fill the catastrophic void his brother had left behind. He wasn't filling the void. He was paving over it, meticulously crafting a new reality with himself at the very center. How naive I was. I saw a son stepping up. I should have seen a killer covering his tracks. His transformation was a masterpiece of manipulation. He was performing the role of the perfect, surviving son, and I, his grieving mother, was the most willing audience. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I would see the cracks in his performance. I once found him standing in the hallway, staring at a photograph of him and Leo as children. There were no tears in his eyes. There was only a profound, chilling emptiness. When he noticed me, he quickly manufactured a sad smile. "Just thinking about him, Mom," he'd whisper. But his eyes never changed. There was a new tension between him and Arthur, too. Conversations would halt the moment I entered a room. I'd see them in the garage, speaking in low, urgent tones, and they'd spring apart when the kitchen door opened. I dismissed it as a shared, private grief between a father and son. I couldn't have imagined it was the ongoing maintenance of a 25-year lie. Arthur had made his choice that night at the gorge. He chose to save one son by sacrificing the memory of the other. And the cost of that choice was a silence that poisoned our family from the inside out. The years passed, as they always do, indifferent to the sorrows they carry. The raw wound of Leo's death scabbed over into a permanent scar, a dull ache that never truly disappeared. Julian married Clara, a girl from the next town over. She was a ray of sunshine, or so it seemed. Sweet, attentive, and utterly devoted to Julian. She called me Mom from the day they were engaged, and her hugs felt genuine and warm. She was the perfect final piece for Julian's perfect illusion. They had 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl. Our grandchildren. For the first time in years, real, uncomplicated laughter echoed through the halls of our home. I finally felt that life was giving us a second chance at happiness. Julian had inherited his father's talent for carpentry and ran his own business. On the surface, everything was not just normal, it was wonderful. We were the family who had survived a tragedy and emerged stronger. But now, lying at the bottom of this gorge, with my ribs screaming and the metallic taste of blood on my tongue, I understand that all that happiness was a carefully constructed lie. A stage play designed for an audience of one me. Grief is a wound, but a lie is a cancer. It grows in the dark, silently devouring everything you thought was real. And the first sign that the cancer was about to consume us all began 6 months ago. It started, as the most terrible things often do, with words of love and concern. We had just finished a roast chicken dinner. The house was filled with the comfortable aroma of food and family. It was then that Julian put down his fork and looked at me and Arthur with an expression of deep, practiced sincerity. "Mom, Dad," he began, his voice soft. "Clara and I were talking. You're both in your 60s now, and we worry. We think it's important to have everything in order." Clara reached across the table and stroked my hand. Her fingers were cool. "We love you so much," she said, her voice a sweet melody. "We just want to make sure you're protected, that your wishes are clear." How foolish I was. How utterly blind. I interpreted their words as genuine affection, the natural concern of a loving son. I didn't hear the subtle tuning of a finely crafted trap. The lawyer they recommended was an older man named Albert, someone we had known for years, which made the suggestion feel even safer. We met him the following Tuesday. He laid out the options for our estate, the house, the land I had inherited from my parents, and our life savings. All told, it was nearly $250,000. A lifetime of hard work and careful saving. Albert explained we could put everything in a trust for the grandchildren, or make a traditional will. But Julian, who sat beside us, insisted on another option. "It would be simplest," Julian said, his tone reasonable and calm, "if you just named me and Clara as the sole heirs. That way, we can handle the equitable distribution to the grandkids when the time comes. No complications." He paused, then looked at us with those earnest, empty eyes. "Besides, you're going to need us more as you get older. It's better for us to have direct access to the resources, so we can take care of you properly. No red tape in an emergency." Something in his tone, a subtle note of ownership, made me uncomfortable. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. I remembered, in a sudden sharp flash, how Leo had always talked about helping us financially when we got older. My oldest son had made promises. But Leo was gone, and Julian was our only surviving child. Arthur, ever the pragmatist, seemed convinced. My husband, who had always been more trusting than me, or perhaps, who was simply too exhausted from guarding one secret to look for another, accepted the proposal without hesitation. "That makes sense," he said, nodding at Julian. "It's practical." I voiced my doubts, but they were gentle, easily swept aside. "Are you sure, Julian? It seems like a lot of responsibility." Clara squeezed my hand again, her smile never faltering. "Oh, Margaret, it's not a responsibility, it's a privilege. Taking care of family is what we do." We signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember Clara was wearing a pretty green dress, the color of new spring leaves. After the final signature, she gave me a hug that felt a little too tight, a little too long. Now we're officially a united family forever, she whispered in my ear. Her words gave me a chill then, a deep, primal shudder that I couldn't explain. I didn't know why. Now I do. It wasn't a promise of unity. It was the closing of a cage. And we had just willingly handed our children the key. After we signed the new will, the air in our home changed. It was a subtle shift, like a drop in barometric pressure that signals a coming storm. The gilded cage I hadn't known I was in began to feel smaller, colder. The change was most noticeable in Julian and Clara. Their visits, once a source of simple joy, became strategic. They no longer came just to share a meal or let the children play in the yard. They came with an agenda. Their first target was the house. Our home. The fortress Arthur and I had built not just with wood and nails, but with 40 years of laughter, tears, and shared dreams. They would walk through the rooms, their eyes scanning everything with a kind of cold appraisal I'd never seen before. It wasn't the loving gaze of family. It was the calculating assessment of an auctioneer. "Mom, you should really think about selling this big house and moving somewhere smaller," Clara said one afternoon, her voice laced with that infuriatingly sweet concern. "We could help you find a comfortable little apartment in town." "This house is too big for two people your age," Julian would add, his tone firm, as if it were a settled fact. "If you fall down the stairs or something happens, we're too far away to help you in time." They were trying to sell me a fantasy of safety while planning to rob me of my world. But I loved our house. Every corner held a memory. The faint pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe, charting Leo's and Julian's heights. The worn spot on the floorboards by the fireplace where I rocked my babies to sleep. The scent of aging wood and lemon oil in the air. They were trying to convince me to sell my memories, to put a price tag on my life. "I can't imagine my life anywhere else," I told them, my voice stronger than I expected. "This is our home." When I said this, I saw a flicker of raw irritation in Julian's eyes. It was there for only a second before the mask of the loving son slipped back into place. But I saw it. It chilled me to the bone. "Mom, you're being irrational," he said, the words sharp. "It's about being practical." The worst part was that Arthur began to consider their arguments. My husband, always the pragmatist, started talking about the logic behind their suggestions. "He has a point, Ellie," he'd say late at night as we lay in bed. "The roof will need replacing in a few years. The property taxes keep going up." He was seeing the numbers, the logistics. He refused to see the greed that was so plainly driving them. Each time he sided with them, the wall between us grew another brick taller, and I felt more and more alone. Things escalated a few weeks later. The pressure campaign moved to its second phase. They no longer just wanted our future assets. They wanted control of our present. Julian waited until Clara was clearing the dishes before he broached the new subject. He did it so casually, so smoothly, it was clear he had rehearsed it. "Dad," he started, looking at Arthur, "we should probably get you to give me power of attorney over your finances. It's just a precaution, of course." Clara returned from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron as if she already owned the place. "He's right," she chimed in. "If one of you gets sick or has a health issue, we can manage your affairs without any legal complications. We can pay your bills, handle the insurance. It just makes everything seamless." The way they said it, so logically, so reasonably, it almost convinced me. But it was too much too fast. First the will, then the house, now this. Fear doesn't always arrive like a thunderclap. Sometimes it seeps in like a fog, quiet and cold, until you realize you can no longer see the path ahead. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Arthur's steady breathing beside me. Every word they'd said replayed in my mind, and with each repetition, the loving concern sounded more like a demand. The next day, I knew I couldn't face this feeling alone anymore. I needed an ally. I needed my sister. My sister Beatrice had always been sharper than me, more suspicious of people's intentions. When I told her about Julian's relentless pressure, she was silent for a long moment on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her thinking, connecting dots I hadn't dared to connect myself. "Ellie," she finally said, her voice serious. "Doesn't it seem strange to you that Julian is so anxious to control your money? I mean, from what you've told me, his business is doing well. He's never asked for a loan, has he? Why would a successful man need so much control over his parents' finances?" Her words hit me like a pail of ice water. She was right. It wasn't logical. Julian had always projected an image of success, of self-sufficiency. If he didn't need our money, then his obsession with controlling it wasn't about need. It was about something else. something darker. Have you ever had that feeling? That gut instinct that something is deeply wrong. A little voice in the back of your head telling you not to trust someone, even when you can't quite explain why. It's a powerful, protective instinct. If you've ever experienced that, share your story in the comments below. Sometimes, just knowing you're not alone is the first step to finding the truth. That afternoon, when Julian came by for another of his talks about our future, I decided to confront him. I had to. Clara was with him, a silent, smiling reinforcement. We sat in the living room, in the armchairs that Arthur had built, surrounded by a lifetime of our family's memories. "Son," I said, my hands trembling slightly in my lap, "your father and I are still in our right minds. Why is it so important for you to have control over our financial affairs?" His reaction was immediate and terrifying. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. His face hardened. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by something cold, calculating, and dangerous. For a single, terrifying second, the son I loved vanished, and in his place was a man I did not know at all. "Mom, it's not about control," he responded, his voice tight, strained. "It's about love, care, and family responsibility." But the way he said family responsibility made it sound like a threat. It dripped with a hidden meaning I couldn't grasp, but my soul recoiled from it. Clara, the ever-present peacekeeper, intervened, placing a hand on his arm. Her voice was sweet but firm. "Margaret, we just want what's best for you. It's painful for us to see you worry about these things when we could so easily handle them." Her words were meant to be comforting, but all I heard was condescension. That night, after they left, Arthur and I had our first serious argument in years. He thought I was being paranoid, that my grief for Leo was making me see monsters where there were none. "He's our son, Ellie. He's just trying to help," he shouted, his face flushed with frustration. "No, Arthur, something isn't right," I insisted, tears welling in my eyes. "His behavior has changed. He's not the same. Do you even remember? Do you remember what Julian was like before Leo died? He was different. More distant, more. I don't know, but there was something about him that scared me even then." My husband stopped shouting. The color drained from his face. In his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in 25 years. It wasn't just grief. It was fear. A deep, secret, and ancient fear that he looked at me as if I had just spoken the name of a demon he had spent half his life trying to forget. He knew. He knew I was getting closer to a truth he had sworn to bury forever. His fear was a confession. In that single, unguarded moment, my husband's terror told me more than his words ever had. My paranoia wasn't paranoia at all. It was instinct. I had been living on the surface of our lives, while he had been drowning in the truth underneath. "Arthur," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. "What is it? What are you so afraid of me knowing?" He sank heavily into his armchair, the one he built the year Leo left for college. He looked like a man whose bones had turned to dust. He ran his hands over his face, as if trying to physically wipe away the memories that had been his secret tormentors for a quarter of a century. "You were right, Ellie," he began, his voice broken, raspy. "Julian, he was different before. Before Leo died." I waited, my heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I knew that whatever he said next would change everything. "The arguments you heard," he continued, his gaze fixed on the floorboards he had laid and polished himself. "Between Leo and Julian. They weren't just brotherly stuff. They were about money." The word hung in the air, ugly and profane. "Money? What money?" I asked, though a part of me was already screaming, already connecting the past to the present. Arthur finally looked at me, and I saw the immense weight of his guilt in the depths of his eyes. 3 days before he died, Leo came to me in the workshop. He was furious, more upset than I'd ever seen him. He had papers in his hand, bank statements. He had discovered that Julian had been stealing from our family savings account. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. Leo had noticed discrepancies for months and had been investigating on his own. He had proof, Ellie. Black and white proof that our youngest son was a thief. The confession landed like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. Julian, my quiet, reserved boy, the one who seemed to want for nothing, had been stealing from us. The son I had comforted in his grief had been betraying us long before his brother's death. For 25 years, I had been mourning the wrong tragedy. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I accused him, the betrayal multiplying, spreading from my son to my husband. My whole life felt like a conspiracy against me. Because when Leo died, Arthur's voice choked. You were so broken. You had lost one son. I couldn't bear the thought of you losing your faith in the other. I told myself it was a stupid, youthful mistake. That Julian had learned his lesson in the most horrible way imaginable. I thought telling you would destroy what little we had left. So you let me live a lie, I whispered, the words tasting like poison. You let me grieve a hero and comfort a thief. He didn't give me the whole truth, only a single, sharp shard of it. But it was enough to gut me. That one revelation recast the last 2 decades of my life. Every act of kindness from Julian, every loving gesture, was now tainted. It wasn't remorse. It was a cover-up. And his current obsession with our finances, with the will, with the power of attorney, it wasn't a new greed. It was an old hunger, now more desperate than ever. The dots connected with horrifying speed. His business, I said, the realization dawning. Beatrice was right. His business isn't doing well, is it? That's what this is about. Arthur nodded grimly. The dam of his secrets had been breached, and now the flood was coming. I started to get suspicious a few months ago, Ellie. Right after he first mentioned the will. His pressure, it felt frantic. It reminded me of how he was back then. He stood up, walked over to the old roll-top desk he'd inherited from his father, and pulled out a folder of papers he had hidden under a stack of old blueprints. I've been doing some discreet investigating, he admitted, his voice low with shame. His carpentry business, it's a hollow shell. He's on the verge of bankruptcy. He owes more than $100,000 to banks and suppliers. He handed me the papers. They trembled in my hands as I read the numbers, the overdue notices, the threatening letters. Julian wasn't the successful man he pretended to be. He was a desperate failure, drowning in debt, who had been living on a throne of lies for decades. And there's more, Arthur said, his voice grim. Some of these debts aren't to banks. They're to unofficial lenders. Dangerous people, Ellie. The kind who don't care about excuses. Suddenly, his desperation made a terrifying kind of sense. He didn't just want our money. He needed it. Our deaths weren't just a convenience for him. They were a financial solution. A bailout plan written in blood. And Clara. What about sweet, smiling Clara? Does she know? I asked, my mind racing, replaying every cloyingly sweet conversation, every seemingly innocent question she had ever asked. I'm sure she does, Arthur replied, his face hard as granite. I've noticed it too. How she directs the conversations toward money. How she asks specific questions about our savings, the value of the house, our life insurance policies. They aren't innocent questions, Ellie. They're calculations. She's been helping him figure out exactly how much we're worth. Her sweet smile was not a reflection of her love for us, but the camouflage for her ambition. She wasn't just a wife, she was a co-conspirator. We sat there for what felt like hours, the horrible truth of our situation laid bare on the oak table where we had shared thousands of family meals. We were no longer a husband and wife having an argument. We were 2 terrified parents, united at last against the predator we had raised. The silence was heavy, thick with the final, unspoken question. The question that had been buried for 25 years. I looked at my husband, the man I had loved and trusted for over 40 years, the man who had kept this poison inside him for the sake of a lie. Arthur, I began, my voice trembling. If he was stealing from us then, and he's this desperate now, what really happened to Leo at the gorge? He didn't have to answer. I saw it on his face. The official story was a lie. His story about protecting me was a lie. There was one final, monstrous truth left, and I knew, with a certainty that froze the blood in my veins, that he was about to tell it. My question hung in the silence between us. What really happened to Leo? It was more than a question. It was a key, turning in a lock that had rusted shut a quarter of a century ago. I watched my husband's composure, the careful structure of denial he had maintained for decades, crumble to dust before my eyes. He sat heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, at the same table where we had shared thousands of family meals. The table where Leo used to do his homework. The table where Julian had always remained silent. The night Leo died, he began, not looking at me but at his own trembling hands resting on the oak table. Julian didn't stay in his room studying. I saw him leave the house around 8 o'clock. I followed him. You followed him? Why? Because something was wrong. I'd overheard them arguing earlier. Leo had found the bank statements. He gave Julian an ultimatum. Tell you and your mother the truth about the money by morning, or he would. I was afraid of what would happen. I wanted to stop them. To mediate. A secret is not a wall, it's a cage. And he had been locked inside it with our son's ghost for 25 years. I found them by the gorge, arguing, yelling horrible things at each other. Leo had the papers in his hand, waving them in Julian's face. "You're a thief, Julian. You're stealing from our own parents. After everything they've done for us. You've always been the favorite. The golden boy. Saint Leo. You've always had everything easy. It's time things changed. This isn't about me. This is about right and wrong. You tell them what you did, or I swear to God, Julian, I will." Leo gave him until morning. But Julian knew. He knew that would be the end of his perfect image. The end of everything. And then Julian, he pushed him, Ellie. It wasn't an accident. He pushed him. With all his strength. I saw Leo try to keep his balance. I saw his face, and then he was gone. The man I married died that night with our son. The person I'd been living with was a stranger, a warden guarding a tomb of lies. I scrambled down the path, he continued, his confession now a torrent. When I got to the bottom, Leo, he was already gone. And Julian was standing over him, crying, trembling, repeating over and over, "It was an accident. It was an accident. He tried to hit me, Dad. I just defended myself, and he slipped. Please, Dad. Please, you have to help me. I can't lose you, too. Mom can't lose us both. Please, Dad, it was an accident." He looked at me with those desperate eyes and begged me to help him. And I looked at Leo, my beautiful firstborn son, lying broken on the rocks. And I knew I couldn't bring him back. But Julian, he was my son, too. My only surviving son. He was alive, and he was asking for my help. And God forgive me, Margaret. I made a choice. In the dark, beside the body of one son, he made a devil's bargain to save the soul of another. But some souls are beyond saving. I believed the lie. Or I chose to believe it. I told him what to say. I helped him create the story. I became his accomplice, Ellie. And every day for 25 years, every time I stayed silent, every time I saw you cry for Leo and said nothing, I became more of his accomplice. I helped him bury the truth, and in doing so, I buried myself. For a long time, I couldn't speak. My entire life, my entire understanding of my family, had been razed to the ground. The loving son was a murderer. The grieving husband was his warden. And I was the fool who had believed them both. The grief was so profound, so absolute, it was almost silent. But through the fog of pain, a new feeling began to crystallize. Cold, sharp, and immediate. Fear. I looked at the financial papers still spread across the table. The mountain of debt. The threats from dangerous men. The lie about Leo wasn't just about the past anymore. It was a prophecy for the future. "Arthur," I said, my voice eerily calm. "If he killed his brother, his own brother, over a few $1,000s 25 years ago." I paused, letting the terrifying logic complete itself. "What do you think he will do to us for $250,000, now that he's this desperate?" We had to go to the police. We had to tell them everything. But Arthur shook his head, a look of complete hopelessness on his face. "With what evidence, Ellie? It's my word against his. And I'm an accomplice to covering up a murder. They'll put me in jail, too. Who would believe a 65-year-old man who has been lying for 25 years? He was right. We were trapped. We knew a monstrous truth, but we were completely, utterly alone with it. Suddenly, the shrill ring of the telephone cut through the heavy silence. We both jumped. It rings again, loud and demanding in the quiet house. Hesitantly, Arthur reached for the receiver and put it on speakerphone. "Hello. Hi, Dad. Hi, Mom. Just calling to check in. Listen, Clara and I were thinking. Your 40th wedding anniversary is next weekend, and we want to do something really special to celebrate. How about we take you both on a trip? We could go on a family hike in those mountains you've always talked about. Take some beautiful pictures, have a picnic, just a perfect day together." A family hike. A perfect day. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. He was going to take us to the mountains to finish what he started 25 years ago. We had just received our own execution order, delivered in the cheerful, loving voice of our only son. A perfect day. The words were a death sentence wrapped in the language of love. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The overwhelming grief and shock were packed away, replaced by a cold, sharp, and primal instinct, survival. I looked at Arthur, and his terrified gaze met mine. We were prey, and our predator was on the phone, purring. We had to play along. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing a lifetime of maternal warmth into my voice, a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Oh, Julian, I managed to say, the sound shockingly normal. That's a very sweet idea, son. Let us think about it, and we'll get back to you tomorrow. After we hung up, the silence that descended was heavier, more terrifying than before. We were no longer just grappling with a 25-year-old murder. We were facing a new one. Our own. The mountains, I murmured, the words catching in my throat. He's going to take us to the mountains to kill us and make it look like an accident. Just like he did with Leo at the gorge. Arthur nodded gravely, the last vestiges of his brokenness being burned away by a new, desperate resolve. We can't go, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. And if we don't? I countered, my mind racing. If I suddenly get sick? He'll find another way. A fire in the house. A robbery gone wrong. Something here, where he controls everything. At least in the mountains, we know what he's going to try to do. We know the script. We had to become actors in the final scene of our own lives, smiling and nodding as our son directed us toward our graves. The next few days were a waking nightmare of pretense. We had to act as if nothing had happened. When Julian and Clara came to visit on Wednesday to plan the details, we had to smile. We nodded as they talked excitedly about the mountain trip, about spending quality family time together. But inside, every fiber of my being was screaming. I was looking into the eyes of my son's murderers, and I was graciously accepting their invitation to become their next victims. Clara arrived that afternoon with a shopping bag and a radiant smile that now seemed like the grimace of a demon. "Margaret, dear," she said, hugging me with arms that I knew would soon push me to my death. "I bought some supplies for our little mountain adventure. Everything we'll need for the picnic." She showed me the contents of the bag as if she were an excited child, but all I could think about was how each of those items was a prop in their elaborate stage play of our murder. "I also brought my new camera," she added, pulling out an expensive-looking digital camera. "I want to capture every moment of this special day. They're going to be photos we'll treasure forever." The irony was so profound it made me physically sick. Julian appeared behind her, carrying a new hiking backpack. "Dad," he said to Arthur, his enthusiasm perfectly feigned. "I bought all the necessary equipment for a safe hike. Ropes, harnesses, lanterns, a first aid kit." Every word was a cruel mockery. Safety equipment. To plan a murder. Her laughter was the most terrifying sound in the world, because it was the sound of someone who felt nothing at all. While they chattered on, Arthur and I were having a silent conversation with our eyes, a terrified communication between two people who were completely, utterly trapped. But we weren't just trapped. We were preparing. That night, when they finally left, we began our own secret preparations. The terror was still there, a cold hand squeezing my heart, but now it was mixed with a sliver of hope. "A plan. We're going to go," Arthur said, his voice low but firm. "But we're going to be ready. I'm going to hide my cell phone in the inner pocket of my jacket. I'll set it to record audio the moment we get in the car. It will record everything that happens, everything they say." His voice broke. "If we manage to survive, we'll have proof. And if we don't, at least someone will know the truth." While he worked out the technical details, I sat down to write a letter. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to write. It was addressed to my sister, Beatrice. In it, I explained everything. Arthur's 25-year secret. The truth about Leo's death. Julian's debts, his desperation, and our absolute certainty that the anniversary hike was a pretext for our murder. I sealed the envelope and hid it in the fireproof box where we keep our important documents. The next day, I called Beatrice. I kept the conversation light, talking about the weather, the grandchildren. Then, just before hanging up, I added, "Arthur and I are going on a little anniversary trip with the kids this weekend. I put a folder with some old family recipes you wanted in our document box. If I forget, remind me to give it to you on Monday, will you?" It was a clumsy code, but I prayed she would understand its hidden urgency. On Friday night, we could barely touch our dinner. We knew it might be our last meal together in our house. Later, in the quiet of our bedroom, we held each other, whispering words that could be our last. "If something happens to me up there," Arthur said, his voice thick with a lifetime of regret, "I want you to know that these 40 years with you have been the best of my life. Despite everything, despite the mistakes and the secrets, I love you more than my own life, Margaret." I cried in silence, memorizing the rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body, the familiar scent of his skin. In the quiet of our bedroom, we said our goodbyes, not knowing if we were facing the end of a trip or the end of everything. "Morning, lovebirds. Ready for your big adventure." His cheerfulness was obscene. Clara appeared behind him, radiant, looking at us as if we were a beloved old painting she was about to acquire. The car ride to the mountains was 2 hours of suffocating tension. Clara put on cheerful pop music, singing along as if we were truly on a fun family outing. Julian drove with careful precision, obeying every traffic law. He couldn't risk a real accident ruining his perfectly planned one. In the back seat, Arthur discreetly took my hand. With his other hand hidden from view, he slipped his phone from his pocket, unlocked it, and started the audio recorder. The trap was set. Now, we just had to pray we wouldn't be the only ones caught in it. When we finally arrived, my heart was hammering so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. The place was beautiful, a picture postcard of nature's serenity. But for me, it was an execution chamber. Julian and Clara got out of the car, stretching and smiling as if it were the happiest day of their lives. He walked to the trunk to get the backpacks, then turned to face us. He beamed a wide, predatory smile. "Ready for the adventure?" he asked. And for the first time in 25 years, I saw past the mask, past the loving sun, and saw the thing that lived underneath. In his eyes was the same cold, calculating glint he must have had the night he stood over his brother's broken body in the dark. The hike was about to begin. The adventure began. The trail started out easy enough, a gentle, winding path between lush green ferns and moss-covered rocks. On any other day, it would have been beautiful. That day, every towering pine tree felt like a tombstone. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every step was a tick of a clock counting down to our own extinction. Clara walked ahead of us, a vision of joyful innocence. She was constantly stopping, taking pictures of wildflowers, of a bird in a tree, her laughter echoing unnaturally in the tense silence between the four of us. "Oh, look at that view. Margaret, Arthur, isn't this just breathtaking?" Her performance was flawless. She was documenting the before of our tragic accident, establishing the narrative. The happy family, the beautiful day, the treacherous, unpredictable mountains. Julian walked behind us. He said very little. He was the silent shepherd, guiding his flock to the slaughter. I could feel his eyes on our backs like daggers. Every time I risked a glance back at him, he would give me that same practiced, loving smile he had perfected over 25 years of lies. "How are you doing, Mom?" "Dad," he would ask, his voice dripping with false concern. "Need to stop and rest?" After an hour, the trail began to climb steeply. My legs felt heavy as lead, and Arthur was breathing with difficulty. We weren't hikers. We were two people in our 60s, and our children knew it. They had chosen a route designed to physically exhaust us, to make us weak and vulnerable for the final act. "We're almost at the main lookout," Clara announced cheerfully. But I had studied the map before we left. The real lookout was at least another hour away. Her lie was a flare in the dark, confirming that their destination was not a tourist spot. It was a pre-selected, isolated stage. I tried to memorize every detail of the trail. If I somehow survived this, I would need to be able to tell the police exactly where it happened. Arthur was doing the same. Our occasional shared glances were filled with terror and a grim, shared determination. We were walking toward our deaths, but we were also walking toward our only chance to gather the evidence that would convict our murderers. "Oh, look at that!" Clara suddenly shouted, her voice sharp with manufactured excitement. She pointed to a rocky outcrop that loomed to our right, off the main path. "That cliff has an incredible view. Why don't we climb up there to take some special anniversary photos?" My blood ran cold. There it was. The place. It rose like a jagged tooth above the main trail. The path leading to it was narrow and covered in loose scree. It was perfect. Perfect for a fall. Perfect for a murder with no witnesses. "I don't know, Clara," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "That trail looks pretty dangerous for people our age." But Julian was already moving toward the turnoff, his new backpack looking obscene and out of place in the wild landscape. "Come on, Mom," he said, using the same wheedling tone he'd used as a child when he wanted a second piece of cake. "It'll only take a few minutes. Besides, Clara's right. The photos from up there are going to be spectacular." The way he said spectacular, it was a promise and a threat. Arthur squeezed my hand, a silent reminder. "The phone is recording. We have to go all the way." The climb was exhausting and terrifying. Loose rocks slid under our feet. More than once, I stumbled, and Julian's hand would shoot out to steady me. His touch felt like a brand. When we reached the top, my legs were trembling. The view was indeed spectacular. From that precipice, you could see the whole valley spread out like a map. On any other day, I would have cried from the sheer beauty of it. That day, all I saw was the horrifying drop. The abyss in front of me was nothing compared to the abyss I saw in my son's eyes. "Come over here for the photos," Clara shouted, positioning herself with her back to the drop, near the crumbling edge of the cliff. "I want the whole valley in the background." Arthur and I approached slowly, each step a final march. I could see Julian moving behind us, positioning himself, calculating the angles the force required. "Perfect," Clara exclaimed, raising her camera. "Now hug each other and smile." A big 40th anniversary smile. Arthur and I held each other, a desperate final embrace. The camera flashed, again and again, each flash like a lightning strike before the thunder. "Take one more," Julian suggested, his voice low as he moved closer behind us. "But this time, stand back just a little, so the landscape looks even better." One step back. We were now standing on the absolute edge of the precipice. The world fell away behind us. Clara raised the camera one last time. The sweet, loving mask had finally fallen from her face. Her expression was flat, cold, and empty. "Smile," she said, her voice no longer a melody but a monotone. "This is going to be your last photo." In that instant, Julian lunged, his arms outstretched, his face a mask of grim determination. But Arthur was ready. In a last, desperate surge of adrenaline, he spun as Julian made contact, grabbing his son's wrist. "If we're going down, you're coming with us," he roared, a lifetime of fury in his voice. For one chaotic second, we were a tangled mess on the precipice. A macabre dance between life and death. Clara screamed and grabbed Julian, trying to pull him back, but the momentum was too great. I felt the ground give way, felt the sickening lurch of gravity taking hold. And then all four of us fell together, locked in a deadly embrace. We didn't just fall. We crashed. The cliff face wasn't a sheer drop. It was steep and overgrown. We tumbled through a thick canopy of pine trees, a storm of snapping branches and tearing leaves. The trees didn't save us, but they broke our fall, slowing our descent in a brutal, violent cascade. I felt a branch gouge my arm, another slam into my ribs. The pain was sharp, immediate. And then the final impact. The impact was brutal. The horrible sound of my own body shattering against the ground. The pain was a white-hot supernova, indescribable. I tasted blood and dirt. This is it, I thought. He's won. But then, through the fog of agony, I heard a voice. Weak, strained, but clear. It was Arthur. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice a desperate breath. "Don't move. Play dead." The world returned not in a flood, but in fragments. The coppery taste of blood. The searing fire in my right arm and ribs. The wet, sticky feeling of my own blood soaking my clothes. And above it all, my husband's command, echoing in the ruins of my mind. Play dead. Every breath I held was a scream I refused to let out. My stillness was my final weapon. A few feet away, I could hear moaning. Julian and Clara. They had survived, too. The trees had been indiscriminate in their mercy. "Clara," I heard my son's broken voice. "Are you okay?" His concern for his wife, the co-architect of this horror, made my stomach churn with a new kind of sickness. This man, who had murdered his brother and tried to kill his own parents, was still capable of love for someone. I think my leg is broken," Clara moaned. "It hurts so much, Julian." There was a pause, then her voice, sharp with venom. "And what about the old people?" The old people. That's all we were to her. Not family. Not the people who had welcomed her, loved her, and shared our lives with her. We were just obstacles, a means to an end. I heard a slow, agonizing crawl through the dirt and leaves. Julian was coming towards us. My heart hammered against my broken ribs, a frantic drum I was sure he could hear. I forced my breathing to become shallow, almost non-existent. I let my eyes stay open just a fraction, unfocused, staring into nothing. He was so close I could feel his breath on my cheek. It was a moment of pure, distilled terror. He put 2 fingers to my neck, searching for a pulse. I prayed my own frantic heartbeat wouldn't betray me. After an eternity that lasted only a few seconds, he moved on to Arthur. "They're dead," he finally announced, his voice flat and empty. "Both of them. Eyes open, but they're not breathing." His lie filled me with a strange, wild hope. If he believed we were dead, we had a chance. "Perfect," Clara whispered, and the satisfaction in her voice chilled me more than the cold ground I was lying on. It worked just like we planned. A beat. Well, except for the part where we fell, too. I heard her bitter, humorless laugh. They spoke their guilt into the listening air, weaving a noose for themselves with their own whispered words. For the next few minutes, they discussed their next move. They were both injured but mobile. Their plan was to crawl until they found a place with a cell signal, call 911, and then tell the story they had so carefully rehearsed. "Remember the story," Julian said, his voice regaining some of its authority. "We were taking pictures. A rock came loose under Dad's feet. He tripped, and trying to grab on, he pulled Mom with him. We tried to help, but the ground gave way and we fell too. It's crucial that our stories match." "I know," Clara snapped. "We've practiced this 100 times. We're the traumatized survivors of a horrible family tragedy. Poor us." Their voices gradually faded as they began their slow, painful crawl away from the scene of their crime. When a profound silence finally fell, broken only by the buzzing of flies, Arthur whispered my name, his voice so low it was barely a sound. "Margaret? Are you okay?" "Alive," I whispered back, the single word in agony to produce. "You." "My left leg is broken," he rasped. "Ribs too. The phone, it's still in my jacket. It recorded everything. We had it. The proof. We were broken, but we had won. But the terror was far from over. We were alive, but trapped at the bottom of a gorge, gravely injured, with no way to call for help ourselves." "Arthur," I whispered, a new urgency in my voice. "Before they come back, tell me the rest. The last detail about Leo's night." He sighed a long, rattling breath. "After Julian pushed him," he said, his voice thick with shame. "Before I got down there, Julian told me later he scrambled down first. Not to help him, but to go through Leo's pockets. To get the bank statements back. He took the evidence off his brother's dead body, then climbed back up and pretended he was in shock when I found him. The absolute coldness of it, the final layer of his sociopathy, settled over me. There was no humanity left in him. It wasn't long before we heard the sound of approaching rescuers. Julian and Clara had found help. Soon, this gorge would be flooded with people. This was the most crucial moment. "Ellie," Arthur whispered urgently. "If they find us alive now, they'll know we heard them. Julian will find a way to destroy the phone, to silence us. We have to keep pretending. All the way to the hospital. We were being saved by people who thought we were victims of a tragedy, never suspecting we were actually the star witnesses to a murder. The rescuers were efficient and professional. I heard them rappel down the cliff face. I heard Julian and Clara's masterful performance. Down here," Julian shouted, his voice thick with fake despair. "My parents. Please hurry. I can't believe this happened." Clara sobbed. "We were so happy. It was all so fast." The first rescuer reached us. I remained limp, my eyes open and vacant. I felt his hands check my pulse, his ear listen for breath at my mouth. "This one still has a faint pulse," he shouted up, referring to Arthur. "The woman. I'm not sure. She's unresponsive. I need the medical team down here, now." The plan was working. For the next hour, we were poked, prodded, and stabilized, all while fighting every instinct to cry out in pain. We were secured to stretchers and hoisted up out of the gorge, a slow, agonizing ascent back into the world. In the medical helicopter, flying towards the hospital, I could feel Arthur's presence on the stretcher next to mine. The paramedics were working frantically on him. From their tense conversation, I knew his condition was critical. A terrible fear gripped me. What if he died before we could tell the truth? What if I was left to face this alone? The hospital was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. I was taken to an emergency room, where they began to work on my injuries. I had to maintain the act, pretending to be unconscious while my body screamed. "Doctor," I heard a young nurse say. "Her vital signs are strange. Her pulse is stronger than we'd expect for someone this unresponsive." My heart leaped into my throat. They knew. My body was betraying our secret. But the doctor just murmured something about the body's mysterious ways of clinging to life. A few hours later, the doctor came out to speak to Julian and Clara, who were waiting with a police officer. I could hear them through the curtain. "Your father is stable, but he's in critical condition," the doctor said gravely. "As for your mother, her injuries are catastrophic. I'm very sorry. We've done everything we can. It's best to prepare yourselves." I heard Clara let out a theatrical sob. "Can we see them?" Julian asked, his voice thick with false grief. "Just for a minute. To say goodbye." The doctor agreed. A moment later, I felt Julian's presence beside my bed. He took my hand. "Mom," he whispered, his voice full of poison honey. "If you can hear me, I want you to know that I love you. I'm so sorry this happened. But then he leaned closer, his lips almost touching my ear, his voice dropping to a barely audible, venomous hiss meant only for me. You should never have asked so many questions about the finances. Some truths are better left buried. Just like Leo. In the corner of the room, a young nurse was quietly checking the readings on a monitor. Her back was mostly to them. When Julian whispered, she froze. Her head turned just slightly. Her eyes widened in absolute shock and horror. Arrogance. That is the fatal flaw of the wicked. My son, so confident in his meticulous planning, so certain of my impending death, made a final, catastrophic mistake. He couldn't resist one last, cruel taunt. And in doing so, he spoke his guilt into the ear of an angel. The nurse, Inez, remained frozen for a long moment. I could see the conflict warring in her eyes, the instinct to dismiss what she'd heard as a bizarre, stress-induced comment, versus the chilling certainty that she had just become a witness to something monstrous. She looked from the door where Julian had left, back to the monitors displaying my strangely stable vital signs, and then to me. Her professionalism battled with her humanity. Humanity won. Ma'am, my name is Inez. I know you can hear me. What I just heard is not normal. If you are in danger, you need to tell me somehow. Her voice was an anchor in the storm of my pain and fear. Hope, fierce and bright, surged through me. With a colossal effort of will, I channeled all my remaining strength into a single tiny muscle. Very slowly, almost imperceptibly, I moved my index finger. Inez gasped a tiny, sharp intake of breath. "Oh my God," she whispered. "She's pretending." I moved my finger again. Twice. "Yes. Listen," she said, leaning even closer, her voice urgent. "I'm going to pretend I'm checking your for. If you are in danger from those people who were just here, your son and his wife, move your finger 3 times. Without hesitation, my finger twitched 3 times against the starched white sheet. They did this to you, she stated, more than asked. 3 more movements. Inez moved away from my bed, her actions calm and professional as she checked my monitors, but I could see the resolve hardening her expression. She was no longer just a nurse. She was my protector, my ally. The next few minutes were the longest of my life. Finally, I heard footsteps approaching. It was Inez, accompanied by the chief physician and 2 police officers. "Ma'am," said one of the officers, a middle-aged man with a serious, kind face. "I'm Detective Johnson. We understand you may be in a very dangerous situation. You are safe now. Can you open your eyes?" Slowly, painfully, I let my eyelids flutter open. The bright hospital light was blinding, but the faces surrounding my bed were the most beautiful things I had ever seen. My voice was a dry, raspy whisper. My son and his wife, they pushed us. The dam had broken. For the next hour, I told them everything. The 25-year-old secret of Leo's murder. Julian's thefts. The pressure campaign, the will, the mountain of debt. And finally, the most important thing, the recording. My husband's phone, I rasped, pointing a trembling finger in the direction of Arthur's room. It recorded everything. Their confession. The plan. Everything. Detective Johnson's eyes gleamed. He immediately went to the room where Arthur was being treated. Arthur, who had regained consciousness an hour after me, confirmed my story without hesitation and surrendered his phone. Down in the waiting room, our children were still performing in their theater of lies, unaware that the final act had been written and the curtain was about to fall. Julian Black? Clara Black. They stood up, their faces masks of practiced sorrow. "Yes," Julian asked. "Is it about my mother?" "You are both under arrest," Detective Johnson said, his voice ringing with authority, "for the attempted murder of Margaret and Arthur Black, and for the murder of Leo Black, committed 25 years ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Then chaos. "What are you talking about?" Clara shrieked. "We're the victims here. They died in an accident." "Ma'am," the officer replied calmly, "your in-laws are alive, and we have a full recording of your crimes." The moment the word recording was spoken, their evil alliance, a bond forged over years of deception, shattered in an instant. It was all his idea. Clara screamed, pointing a manicured finger at her husband. "I didn't want to do any of it. He forced me." "You liar." Julian snarled back, his face contorted with hate. "You were the one who suggested the cliff. You planned all of this." They were like 2 rats trapped in a cage, turning on each other in a desperate, futile attempt to save themselves. The trial began 6 months later. The recording was the heart of the case, but it was our testimony that gave it a soul. On the day I had to testify, I looked at the man in the defendant's box. I saw no remorse in his eyes, no pain. I didn't see the son I had raised. I saw a cold and calculating stranger. When I finished recounting every horrible detail, I addressed him directly. I have searched your face for a sign of the little boy I loved, but he is not there. My son died the night you killed his brother. And what has been living in his place for 25 years is a monster that I unwittingly helped create. The jury found them both guilty on all counts. First-degree murder. Attempted first-degree murder. They were sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. The judge's words were not a victory, but a final, solemn closing of a tomb. Now, 1 year later, Arthur and I have begun the process of formally adopting our grandchildren. They are beautiful, innocent children who deserve a chance to grow up knowing what true love is, not the manipulative, toxic performance they received from their biological parents. Grandma, tell me a story about Uncle Leo again. Of course, my love. Did I ever tell you about the time he built the most amazing treehouse in the old oak tree? He built it for everyone. I will spend the rest of my days telling them about their uncle, the brother they never knew. About his kindness, his laughter, his honesty. They are not the legacy of Julian's evil. They are the continuation of Leo's goodness. I have learned that evil can wear the face of your child, but I have also learned that love, true and resilient, can rise from the ashes of the most profound betrayal and build a new home. Thank you for following Margaret's incredible journey of survival and justice. The deepest truths are often the hardest to face. If this story touched you, please subscribe to our channel for more true stories that deserve to be heard. And remember to always trust your intuition. It might just save your life.